you have the option now to stay in the session or leave if you want to. Um, but we will be assuming that if you're attending the session, you've provided us your consent to share this recording with our students who are not able to attend today and post it on our website for anyone who wants to access a recording of this session. That being said, and there's nothing else for the any other announcement. So now I'm happy to welcome Craig Elias. Craig and I have known each other for the last year and a half, and if you know Craig, he is a truly inspiring personality. I've learned so much from him. He's a guy who can throw out ideas on the go. So very he's very popular among our Concordia students, and if you have talked to him, you would want to talk to him again and again. That's what I feel, and it's a pleasure having you here, Craig. I don't want to go into your achievements because there are a lot, and once people see your presentation, they will know that you are an amazing person and an expert in helping student entrepreneurs or first-time entrepreneurs get on their feet. So without much delay now, I would pass on the mic to you, Craig, and the floor or the screen is all yours now. You're on mute, Craig.
There we go. Now I've been unmuted myself. Thank you very much. So as you heard, my name is Craig Elias, and I'm actually a big believer of networking. And I can't see the chat, but the first thing I want to encourage all the people that are on this call to do, I want you to put in the chat, if you are open to networking, put the link to your LinkedIn profile. I find that in many cases, half the benefit of sessions like this is actually the people that you meet in the room. So take a few minutes, just do that as I go through some of the slides that I have. But while I'm doing this, here's the question that I actually have for everybody that's on this call. The question is, what is the #1 reason that startups fail? Does anybody want to guess why it is that people that get started fail? Anybody brave enough to put in the chat why it is that startups fail? No one's brave enough? That's okay. I'll tell you the reason. The data suggests that the #1 reason that startups fail, well, they don't know the end in mind, so Julio, maybe, but it turns out what the data says is that you built a product that nobody wants. That's what the data says. So today, part of what I'm hoping to accomplish is how do I find a way to help you actually avoid that from happening? So what's inside this presentation? What we're going to spend some time talking about today, we're going to talk about something called a leaner canvas. If you've been around startups for a while, you might have heard of something called a lean canvas. But the challenge is that when you start with a big canvas, very often you're filling in the boxes that don't matter the most first. So we'll talk about this thing called a leaner canvas. I'll share with you something around what I've heard called as transactional velocity and how we need to think or should think about the impact that it has when we have an idea. And then I will also share with you some of the latest work by Ash Moria, who I'm a big fan of and I know relatively well, around what it calls a customer forces canvas. And we'll actually go through the process of filling part of it in. And at the end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer up 25 copies of a book by a guy named Amos Schwartzfarb. Amos spoke this past summer at our Innovation Rodeo, and we're going to give away 25 copies of his book. The first 20 copies go to those that fill in the form first. There are then 5 additional copies that I will pick people that give me the reason they should get a copy. And the reason you should get a copy is not just based upon your own personal need. It's based upon how are you going to share what you learned today or what you're going to learn from the book. How do you find a way to pay it forward and share that with other people? So who's this guy named Craig Elias? I'm a lucky salesperson who became an entrepreneur. and I got involved in a competition for billion-dollar business ideas. And first prize was $1 million US. I ended up winning the entire competition, got the money, moved down to California, lived on an island halfway between San Francisco and Oakland. And no, it's not Alcatraz. While I was down there, my company was chosen by Dow Jones as one of the most promising startups in North America. I actually had that happen twice, and I ended up on NBC News. But then something happened. I became a dad when I came back home, because I promised myself and I promised my wife that I was not going to be a successful entrepreneur with a ruined marriage and dysfunctional kids. So I put in place a CEO and came home. And when I came home, I decided I was going to try and find a way to help as many entrepreneurs as possible and do it as little as possible, because I'd learned a ton while I was down in Silicon Valley. So I started doing coffee meetings, 6, 8, sometimes 10 coffee meetings a week. I did that for 15 years, right up until the middle of March when all of that ended. So this is a picture of my son. Now he's in here somewhere. This is a scout camp we go to on occasion. This one is about 1.5 years old now. Now my son is a little bit of an overachiever, just like his dad. And the way you can pick my son out in this picture is he's the guy with 2 guns. We have these water pistol fights in the neighborhood. He's always got one down his back shirt, one in his pocket, and the one he's actually using. And I always try to give my son interesting experiences. So in February of this year, I got involved in a hackathon around banking services and how can we find a way to solve a specific problem. And we came up with this problem of all these people that have side hustles are impacted by the tax implications. So myself, my son, who's third in from the left, that's me in the orange shirt. Sometimes I'm known as the orange shirt guy because I have, I think, close to 40 orange shirts now. We put together this really cool solution. The cool thing is we actually ended up winning. My son got to put his money towards a sailing trip. So got lucky as an entrepreneur. I am a big fan and a big believer of LinkedIn. I think I'm close to celebrating my 18th anniversary on LinkedIn. So there's 700 million users on LinkedIn. I'm usually 3,956. When I finished down in Silicon Valley, I had some time at Babson College. I love Babson College. They only teach one thing, entrepreneurship. Small place, 4-year institution, 2,500 students, and students that graduate on average make more money than graduates from every other post-secondary in all of North America except for one, which is MIT. And for me, this is the power of entrepreneurship. I then got involved in a program called the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses Program. I'm a growth advisor for them. I'm on a special advisory committee for South by Southwest down in Austin, Texas, this 2-week-long innovation festival that is one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. I am a sales mentor and a speaker for a B2B accelerator down in Silicon Valley called The Alchemist. But I get to spend the vast majority of my time helping students as the entrepreneur residence at Bow Valley College. And when I started 6 years ago, I started by running this on-campus business idea competition. And what I realized after I had run this for a little while, I realized there were lots of other post-secondary schools in the province where students didn't actually have access to resources if they wanted to become an entrepreneur. So I came up with this crazy idea called 150 Startups. How do I find a way to work with everybody across the province, like Isha, and all these different post-secondary schools to help more students become entrepreneurs? I reached out to some people that I'd heard of or knew slightly. They gave me some initial funding. And then last year, they showed up with $700,000 to help me run this program for the next 4 years. And we really only have one purpose. Our purpose is how do we find a way to put more role models on campuses all the way across the province? Because what Dan says and what I believe is that as soon as you put role models on campus who are successful, all of a sudden more students would want to become entrepreneurs. I think of this one student at Concordia named Jason, and I'm like, wow, someone told me what Jason was doing, and I was like, that's amazing. And when I phoned him up, he's like, yeah, no, that's not right. We're doing 4 times more than what someone told you. So if you get a chance, talk to Isha about Jason. We then send our top people in this pitch competition we run for students all the way across the province down to a boot camp down in Silicon Valley called Draper University. 5 weeks, you're down there, in an older hotel that's been converted for this specific purpose. And we've been very fortunate that we've had some students that have done really well. This is Cole. Cole, when he went down, he was the only person that went down. This was a couple of summers ago. There were 80 different startups from 23 countries. At the end of a 5-week boot camp, he gets 2 minutes to pitch to 200 angel investors and VCs. And his company got picked as the most investable out of all of them. And if I remember correctly, he now runs a 17-person company up in Edmonton. This is last summer. And when I say last summer, I mean 2019, not 2020. Last summer's contestants, we sent the top 3, which are the ones on the right, down to the same boot camp. The 2 ladies on the left ended up 2nd and 3rd out of all of them from that cohort. And Daria, with the hat on, she ended up with a 6-figure US investment while she was down there. I have had the good fortune to visit and speak at tons of incubators and accelerators throughout Canada, United States, Australia, and Europe. And every time I go somewhere, I learn something new. And along the way, I've built this really cool network of people that I tap into on occasion when I want to learn something or get introduced to totally cool people. One of those people is Ash on the very top left. And a couple of summers ago, we brought Ash into Calgary to share his insights on how do you know whether or not a business idea is going to work. So there is a fair bit of stuff that comes out of Ash's book called Running Lean. Earlier this year, he did mentor training. He trained 60 people across the province about how can they mentor other people. The province then mentored or paid for him to mentor 30 more. So there are almost 100 mentors in this province around Lean Canvas. And there are several people that are in Startup Edmonton, Startup Calgary, and all the post-secondaries that you have wherever you go, pretty much anywhere in the province. And Ash has this tool called a Lean Canvas. Some of you might even be aware of it. The challenge with the Lean Canvas is that people start a Lean Canvas very often, unfortunately, talking about their solution. That's the thing they're passionate about. What all the mentors now know, and some of you who have seen some of Ash's work, know that being passionate about your solution is probably the worst thing you can do. What you need to do is you need to find a way to be passionate about the problem that you're solving or the people that you're helping. So what has happened in the last little while, Ash has started something called a leaner canvas. How do you find a way when you just get started to focus on the 4 things that matter most? This is what a leaner canvas looks like. The reason that leaner canvas got created was that entrepreneurs would show up to a program or a mentor or go for coffee with somebody, and they filled out the entire lean canvas. The challenge was that they then were so tied to what they'd already done, they were less likely to make the changes needed in order to make themselves more likely to be successful. This was the need that created this whole leaner canvas. How do you just start with 4 simple segments, get those 4 done before you decide whether you want to go any farther? What I'm hoping will happen at the end of today's session is you will feel empowered. You'll now know what it is you need to do in order to say, is my idea worth pursuing? And if it is, what do I then do next? Part of what I'm hoping you'll take away is that it's not any little idea that you have. It's your idea combined with things that lots of other people will tell you that turns what you have into a really big idea. And it turns out that idea that won the $1 billion idea contest, when I first had this idea, I took a guy named Mark out for coffee. And Mark came along and said, you've got all these holes in your business. And I said, great, do you know how I can fill any of these holes? And he says, yeah, you can do this one this way, this one this way, and this one this way. I still had all kinds of holes left over that he told me about. I'm like, well, who else should I talk to fill in the holes? And over the span of having 50 coffee meetings, I took a little idea that was like this big, and I made it like this. The smartest thing I did was I went out and I talked to people and took honest, candid advice and feedback. This is what I call transactional velocity. So let's pretend that you could start something today and be successful right away. Unfortunately, this is what happens. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. For a lot of people, it takes them 3, 6, 9 months to figure out all the things that are wrong and then launch a business. The problem is that most people think, well, that little spot down on the bottom left-hand corner, that red spot, that's the only impact if I'm late by 6 months, because it takes me longer to figure out who are my customers, how do I get to them, why do they buy, how much will they pay? It turns out it's not this little piece. The data actually suggests that if you take 6 months longer to launch a product or service, you can lose as much as 1/3 of all the profit you ever would have generated. So for me, the big thing to take away here is, how do I find a way to go talk to total strangers so they will give me guidance and advice around my business idea? And I will share with you in a little while who are the people you really want to go get advice from. But the first thing that's in this leaner canvas is, how do you find a way to solve someone's problem? How do you take away something that drives them crazy? When you think about this problem, the question is, how often does the problem actually happen? The more often it happens, the better for us, because we're going to solve that problem. And then, how much time or how much money does someone spend on this problem every time that it happens? What we want to find a way to do is take a problem away. It seems that people don't spend money on making things better. They spend more money on taking away the things they hate. So what you want to figure out is, how do you find a way to help someone remove a problem? How do you help them avoid, reduce, minimize, mitigate, or eliminate something bad? You might have heard of this before when people talk about, is your solution a vitamin or a painkiller? We all know we should take vitamins. How many of us take vitamins? I'm sure not very many. But if you're in pain every day, you're going to take your painkiller on a very regular basis. So part of this, will your idea fly? You need to make sure you're solving a very specific problem that people will pay something to take it away. You also then need to be able to figure out, what is your competition? What are you competing against? And I hear people say to me all the time, I have no competition. So don't think of competition as someone who does the exact same thing that you do. Think of competition as an alternative, some other way that somebody can solve the same problem or help someone get the same outcome, but a completely different way that they solve the problem. One of the ways that I help people understand, how do you understand between competitors and competition? You ask the question, who are my competitors? But when you ask the question, what is my competition? You end up coming with a totally different perspective. And one of the examples I use on occasion is jewelry stores. If we all owned a jewelry store in Edmonton and we're all doing $5 million in revenue, the question is, what do we compete against? So maybe just write in the chat. You own a jewelry store, it's $5 million. Okay. Arden owns a jewelry store, it's $5 million. Jordan owns a jewelry store, it's $5 million. We're all in Edmonton. What do we compete against? The body shop. Maybe we compete against the body shop. I totally agree, because the different way that somebody can say to somebody else, I'm sorry for being an idiot, or I love you, is flowers, chocolate, perfume, the body shop, as someone said here. Maybe an Apple Watch could be, cars, pets, purses, and trips. This place down on the bottom right-hand corner, it's called San Sebastian, Spain. It is the food mecca of the planet. There are more Michelin-rated restaurants than anywhere else on the planet except for Tokyo. Now, I saved some money up when I want to celebrate my 10-year anniversary with my wife. We're foodies, so we went to San Sebastian, Spain. I found the most expensive hotel right on the beach with an amazing view. This is like straight out of a James Bond movie. And like any really good husband, put in the chat, what do you think I made for dinner for our 10-year anniversary? What did I make for dinner for my 10-year anniversary? Grilled cheese. Wow, no, steak. Steak would be my choice. No, you know what, Allie? I didn't make steak. You know what I made for dinner on our anniversary? I made reservations. This is Arzak. No, sorry. This is Zubera. This was a single one-star Michelin-rated restaurant. That was our first super high experience of food in San Sebastian. Before we left, we went for dinner at this place here called Arzak. Back then, it was the number 16 rated restaurant in the planet. It was an amazing experience. So when you start figuring out whether you've got an idea worth pursuing, what you need to figure out is, what do you really compete against? Now, this is an actual slide, a competitive slide from a lady named Julie, who owns a company called Open Ocean Robotics. She scours the planet in the ocean, coming up with all this analysis that today was done a lot by research ships, which are super expensive. Buoys, which are very popular, and then other drones that are nowhere near as good as hers. Now, Julie, in her case, has another competitive advantage because she once rode to Australia through 2 hurricanes with her then boyfriend, now husband. And Julie and I spent some time on this competitive analysis, and we were working on this competitive analysis because Julie was in a pitch competition for $100,000. Canada-wide pitch competition, $100,000. The day before she flies to Calgary, after we spent some time on her competitive analysis, she sent me a picture. Turns out she was in a pitch competition the night before she came to Calgary. And she won $100,000 in a pitch competition. And then she flies to Calgary in less than 24 hours. She wins a second $100,000 pitch competition in less than 24 hours. And one of the things that she understood better than most is she's not competing against people who do the exact same thing. She's competing against all the different ways that people spend more money solving the same problem. Now, I learned a lot of this a long time ago by reading this article in Harvard Business Review. It really helped me understand the difference between competitors and competition. It's kind of like, or it is like, it's like Southwest Airlines. So WestJet in Canada is modeled after Southwest Airlines. When Southwest Airlines came out, it only flew between 3 cities in Texas: Austin, Dallas, and Houston. That's all it did. And when it first came out, it didn't view other airlines as its competition. What it viewed as competition was all the other ways that people were traveling between those cities. So car, bus, train. And the cool thing is they could take a billboard halfway between Austin and Dallas, and the billboard says if you'd flown Southwest, you'd be there already. When you focus on these folks called competition, it's easier to say something that they can't say the exact same thing. Now, when you go talk to people about your idea, the question is, whose opinion matters most? If you come to me and talk about your idea and I have an opinion, my opinion doesn't matter. The only opinion that matters is the customer. And I want to make sure that people understand that customers are not the same thing as users. Customers are people that actually pay you for the product or service that you're actually using or selling. If you are selling services for seniors around home cleaning, shopping, all the rest of that stuff, it turns out more times than not, the seniors aren't the customers, right? The customer is the oldest daughter or the last person to leave the house. These are the people that are paying for your product or service. And even though you understand the demographics, how old somebody is, how big their family might be, how much money they might have, or the geographics, where they live, work, play, or learn, or even the things that drive their behavior, psychographics, interests, values, things they won't give up in order to be successful, aspirations, how do they want to leave the world a better place? Just because you've identified customers doesn't mean they're going to become your customer in the next little while. You need to figure out who are the early adopters, who are the people that are most likely to become your customer in the next little while. These are people that have experienced some event that has triggered dissatisfaction with the way things are done today and makes them more likely to switch. So when you get started on this journey, you need to have some sort of hypothesis. You can't just go away and say, I'm just going to go learn. You should start in the beginning with an understanding of how many people do you think, right? Specifically who they are, what they're going to do within a specific time frame, but then why. So before you go away and start talking to total strangers who will give you their opinion, these customers, preferably early adopters, we need to start with some hypothesis. Now, usually when I do a weekend course for students across the province, usually get about 25. My perspective is, and my hypothesis is, that I can get at least 10 of those people to do a minimum of 27 interviews, because that's how they're going to figure out whether or not they've got a product nobody will buy or not. It turns out I was wrong in my hypothesis. Usually I get more than 40% that do this, but what happens is they don't just do 27. It seems like they're always doing more. So once you've got a hypothesis, then you want to go away and do some experiments. There's lots of different ways you can validate whether people want your idea. First of all, we're trying to figure out, is it desirable? Do people even want it? And there's lots of different ways that you can do this. Some of them are easier. Some of them are better. I'm a big believer of doing something that is called free form interviews. How do I go away and actually talk to people? What I'm amazed at is people get lazy and they're like, I don't need to talk to anybody. I just need to go out and send surveys. It turns out surveys suck, because in the early days, you don't even know what questions you should be asking. It's only when you put yourself out there and talk to total strangers, after a while, you'll develop some rhythm. You'll get a much better sense of the questions you should be asking. And even if you go out and talk to total strangers, what I find is most people struggle because there is this thing called a say-do gap. So when you go away and talk to people, they will tell you something. If you ask them, how much would you pay for this? Do you see yourself using it? They'll say something, but the problem is when you finally come out with it, they do something totally different. This is what's called the say-do gap. So we can't use surveys. We have to use interviews. And interviews are hard. You have to go away and talk to total strangers. You have to interrupt them in their journey. So one of the things that I love to do, and I've done this on multiple occasions, is I'll go somewhere where there's lots of people, and I'll find a way to sort of be in front of somebody and say, hi, my name is Craig. I'm an entrepreneur working on an idea. Can I take a couple of minutes and ask a few questions? If they say no, that's okay. I don't take it personally. If they say yes, then I'm going to ask questions. But the really important thing here is you need to make sure you ask the right questions, because the right questions to the wrong answers isn't going to get you to where you need to go. We need to find a way to ask questions about the past, because past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. So it's taken me 3 years. I've worked with some really smart people. We've come up with a very simple collection of 10 questions that are part of this, what is called problem validation interview script. First of all, we need to make sure that people have the problem that we think we can solve. So you go away and you talk to total strangers. The first thing we need to figure out before we ask any other questions is, have they ever had the problem that we're going to solve? And if they've ever had a problem having to pay too much tax, hard time sleeping, worry about their kids at school, only then do we then go through these 10 questions. Now, I don't expect you to get to all 10 questions all the time, but the more questions you can get to, the better. The first question is, once we know they've had this problem, the first question is, when did it start happening? What was that thing that all of a sudden triggered dissatisfaction with the status quo? The second one is, when they went to look for a solution, what were they trying to accomplish? What was that outcome they were hoping they would get? That's the second one. The third one is, what other things did they look at? So this is now our competition. We look at this and say, hey, here's all the different ways people can solve the problem. Then we want to figure out, what did they end up choosing? When we know what they chose, we need to understand, why did they choose that? Now, what I've been told and what I believe is you can't ask why questions, because why questions make people defensive. So I've learned you have to ask what or how questions. So instead of saying, why did you choose that? We ask the question, what made you choose that solution? Once you know what they chose and why they chose it, we need to figure out how much they paid. So often people struggle to understand, how much should I charge for my product or service? I'm a big believer that you charge just enough, less than the competition, that if they're unhappy, they're likely to switch. Now, how big is that number? I've heard as little as 15%. I've heard as big as 50%. But as long as you're at least 15% less expensive than the alternatives, competition, then you're likely to convert these people who are unhappy because they recently had an event into a customer. And then we want to figure out the solution they're already using. What are they unhappy with? Because if we can find a way to solve this problem, we can then go away and get all the customers that buy that by overcoming this dissatisfaction that they have. I'm a big believer that when you get to this point, what you need to ask are called bifurcation questions. Bifurcation questions allow you to take this group of people you're talking to, whether it's 27, 30, or 30,000, and split them into smaller groups. I hear people do these surveys and they come back and say, 80% gave us a favorable response. 100% said they would buy this in the future. 60% said they would do this. But the question is, which 60%? And unless you're asking these bifurcation questions, you're not going to figure out where's that highly motivated portion of the marketplace. And I'll share some information on these bifurcation questions in a minute. The last question we need to ask is, once you find someone who's an ideal candidate, how do we find more people just like them? So we need to ask, where can I find more people just like you? So I'm going to put this slide back up and I'm going to make it all black. So for those of you who want to take a picture of this slide, these are the questions that if you can get the answer to, will help you understand whether or not what you have might be desirable. So I'm going to leave this up for a few more seconds where people grab out their phone. These are the questions we want to ask. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about these customer segmentation questions or bifurcation questions. So we go away and we talk to 30 total strangers who give us an honest opinion of our product or service. We can't go to our friends. We can't go to our family. We can't use ourselves because those people are way too nice. We want people that would rather be helpful, people that don't know us, that don't worry about hurting our feelings. So when we find these kind of people and we get to these questions, 8, 9, and 10, bifurcation, customer segmentation questions, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say we're focused on families and we assume it's parents. And then when we get these answers, we either need to be able to ask or assume, are you the mom or the dad? What does that do? It puts the moms in one part of this survey or an analysis for interviews and the dad's in the other side. Then we ask a second question. Do you have one child or more than one? So now you've broken it down into 4. Moms with one child, moms with more than one child, dads with one child, and dads with more than one child. And then we get to ask one more question. And the question is your youngest under 1 or over? And now we've just split the market into 8 different pieces. And then what we can do, just by using something as simple as an auto filter in Excel, we can see where's the portion of the marketplace that's most likely to become our customer, because those are the ones that are most dissatisfied with the status quo. When we did this earlier this year in this hackathon that myself and my son were in, we went away and we talked to all these total strangers. It was about a side hustle. And it was about whether or not they had the ability to understand and do something around the tax implications of their side hustle. And when we asked these bifurcation questions, it turned out that we noticed a pattern, that of all the people we interviewed, it turned out the vast majority that were most likely to become our customer were men who had little or no knowledge of the tax implications. So that then became who we decided to focus on. That analysis that we did, I think, was one of the reasons that we won that $10,000 grand prize for that hackathon. When you do these interviews, in the perfect world, you do them in person. Can't be done that way. You want to do them over phone or Zoom or Skype or something else of this nature. These are the powerful interview formats. There's an asynchronous, which you can use, but it's nowhere near as good, which is surveys or email. And if you're going to take this data and put it into something, so Google Forms is super handy. When my son and I did this with Derek at this place, we had these iPads. We were actually taking the answers, putting them straight in to the spreadsheet as they were actually being asked. So now that we know about who, the question then becomes when. So what I figured out in 2002 is that there's this buying cycle. This is what actually became this platform that I built to help share information for salespeople. People are either in this buying mode of status quo, right? That's one of them. Here they're happy, not looking to change. One day something happens, makes them unhappy with the status quo. They want to change. They're now in something called a window of dissatisfaction. They want to change, but they don't have the time or the money to do anything about it. And then all of a sudden something happens. Now they have the time or the money, they can afford to look at something. Now they start this process of actively searching for alternatives. And then maybe something happens after that that allows them to justify the purchase. These are the people that then buy something else. So what we're trying to figure out is not the second or the third event. We're trying to figure out what was that first event that made people want to change. My wife and I had this house right by Peter's Drive-In, and I mean on the same block as Peter's Drive-In. But when my wife got pregnant, we were like, we can't live here because we got 16th Avenue just north of us, Center Street over here, Edmonton Trail over there. We left the place we were living. We moved into a quieter neighborhood. We gave up our Mazda 323 and bought a Subaru station wagon. We got life insurance. All of that stuff because we had this event. So we're focused on that first event. Those are the people who are early adopters. How do we focus on those people first? I talk about this from a business to business perspective. McKinsey's done the exact same thing a few years later. Same sort of thing. They call this a loyalty loop instead of status quo. There is this trigger that creates interest, which then creates this initial consideration set. So they've done this for consumers. This initial consideration set is all of your different competition, different ways to solve the problem. Now, the only thing I disagree with this is I don't think people believe or start this active evaluation process until they have an event where they can spend more time or more money doing something about it. Beth is no longer at GE, but she says it doesn't matter if you're selling refrigerators or jet engines, it applies. So there are all these reasons that people want to become your customers, right? It's called RIPES. These are the things they use to justify their purchase. But there's all these other things that get in the way. And we need to understand both. Another person who kind of gets this is a guy, his name is BJ Fogg. He has what's called a behavioral model. So when people's motivation gets beyond this action line or the resistance they need, they're more likely to become your customer. So these are the motivators, things that drive people. They want to get rid of these things. How do I get rid of the pain, the fear, the rejection? And then there's all these things they need to have. They need to have money, time, some sort of physical effort. The hard part is the restrictors, the things that make it hard for people to change, are all these new things they need to go away and do. So when you're focused on the early adopters, you're not focused on the total market. You're not even focused on the people that have a problem that can be addressed, because even the people that have a problem that needs to be addressed, you can't find them. You don't know how to reach them. So you got to find those you can actually reach who are also motivated. So I've got some things that I'm going to share with you that are really good resources. Ash has some really good articles. If you can see the link at the bottom, it's bit.ly/find better problems, but with a capital F, a capital B, and a capital P. You have to use the capitals in order for this to work. He has this customer forces canvas, which is reasonably new, which I'm a big believer of. It's something worth investigating. But I want to give you some resources that are local. So whether you're in Calgary or Edmonton, these are some resources you can use. For me, the best resource is your network. So finding a way to connect with other like-minded people, maybe some that are farther down the path than you are today. Maybe they can help you along the way. So Rainforest AB has these lunch without lunches. It seems crazy. Hey, when they were in person, they were held during lunch, but lunch was not provided, or you didn't even take your lunch. So it's called rainforest.ab, or sorry, rainforestab.ca. They're now all done virtually. And then on Thursday nights, Zach does something called Startup TNT in Edmonton. I love what Zach is doing in Edmonton. If you want some free advice, if you're getting started, Business Link is a great way to get some free advice. If you need money, which once you get started, you're probably going to want, there's an awesome organization called Futurepreneur. If you're under, I want to say it's 40, I know it's 38, but it might now be 40, they will lend you money. They'll help you with a business plan. They'll give you a mentor. And in the first year, all you have to do is pay back the interest. If you want some support from a startup perspective, 2 different organizations down here in Calgary, Startup Calgary, up in Edmonton, Startup Edmonton. I think Startup Edmonton does a phenomenal job. In fact, I honestly think they do a better job than we do down here in Calgary. If you're a tech startup in Calgary, you want to go to Platform Calgary. In Edmonton, Startup Edmonton looks after tech startups and some non-tech startups. And if you want any templates or videos related to the things that I've shared with students to help them become entrepreneurs, how to nail your pitch the first time round, business plan templates, how to do your entire financial analysis in less than 20 minutes. If you go to 150startups.com/resources, that's where you can fill in a form and get access to all of those. So one of the things I promised right at the very beginning of this session was free copies of Amos's book. So if you go to 150startups.com/Amos, if you fill in the form, which includes your email address in case your mailing address doesn't work, and your cell phone number in case some reason you typed your wrong email address in, if you fill in the form, the first 20 people will automatically get a copy of the book. I will mail it to them next week. I then have 5 more I'll give away to the people who say why they should get a copy of this book. This is my contact information. And I wanted to leave 15 minutes for questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to escape out of this presentation. I'm going to bring the meeting back into my big window where everybody else is. And I want to use the next 15 minutes, if we can, to answer any questions that people have. So who has questions? Anybody? Now, Isha, can people unmute themselves at all, or do they have to ask it in the chat?
No, they can unmute themselves and they can ask in the chat. Both the options are available.
Perfect. Brad, so if you're going to make your wife poutine for your anniversary, I'm assuming you might be from Quebec. What questions do you have? Oh, so Greg's got a question. Okay, I'm going to go back to, going to bring my presentation back up. Greg's got a question. In fact, here, you know what I can do? I'm going to do this on the side, Greg. In fact, here, I'll show you. I'm going to go to that slide with the URLs. Okay, so there's 2 of them. I'm going to copy them in here. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go to chats, and I'm going to put them right in the chats. So there's one. Okay, and then I'm just going to get the second one, and then I'll go to the next question. Okay, can I talk a little more about some of the benefits of using the Customer Forces Canvas? The Customer Forces Canvas helps you drill down more into the reasons that people want to become your customer and some of the things that actually get in their way of doing it. Sometimes the term is friction. So there are all these driving forces, but there are all these things that prevent people from becoming your customer. It's designed to be an additional conversation piece. So once you've done the leaner canvas, once you've found somebody to hopefully give you some guidance or feedback or advice on your leaner canvas, and you're like, yes, I've got an idea that's worth pursuing. I want to go do more. For me, it's really important to understand more about the customer. What's going to drive their behavior? How do we find a way to make sure we're focused on the right people? Because the worst thing you can do as a startup is think anybody can be my customer or everybody can be my customer. It's not anybody or everybody. And I'm just going to give you an example. I'm going to give you an example of chemical-free cleaners that people put underneath their sink. Now, when you come out with chemical-free cleaners, the question is, who's the customer? And the first assumption was parents. Well, it turns out it's not all parents. So this first bifurcation question, moms or dads. So who's more likely to buy chemical-free cleaners to put them underneath the kitchen sink? Turns out it's moms. Now the question is, is this moms with 5 kids or moms with 1 kid? Turns out it's moms with 1 kid. Because if the first 2, 3, or 4 kids didn't die because there were chemicals underneath the kitchen sink, their perception of the risk that somebody's going to die from chemicals under the kitchen sink has totally gone away. They're not worried about this. So now we know it's moms with 1 child. But here's the question. I'm going to ask you to put your answer in the chat. You're going to go away. You're going to focus on moms that have 1 child to sell them chemical-free cleaners. Are these moms 26 years old that are more likely to become your customer, or moms that are 40 years old? 26 or 40? Who's most likely to become your customer? Riaz says 26. Brad says 26. Jessica says 40. Ali's got 26. Here's my argument. We got some 40s. We're like totally tied at this point. Who's going to break the tie? One more person. There we go. Jordan says 26. Here's my argument. My argument is that women that are older have had to wait longer, or it's been harder to become pregnant. And they are more risk averse than someone who got pregnant at the age of 26 because it was generally a whole lot easier. Like even in my case, I'm living in San Francisco, okay? My wife is 6 months pregnant when I finally come home. For the first few months, I was coming home every other week. Now, I love my wife, and I came home to spend time with my wife, but I also came home to change the cat litter. So I bought this automatic cat litter box that would scoop all the cat litter and put it into a bucket at the end, and every few weeks I would come home and change it. Because it turns out there's something in cat litter that can kill babies. So what happens is the women that are older generally have had to try harder to get pregnant or wait longer to get pregnant. They're the ones that are more risk averse. So we went from parents to moms with 1 kid, and they're over the age of 40. So I want to just go through here. Other questions. Riaz, we can no longer justify catching people and talking to them in person. What is the best way to find strangers to talk to? Really good question. I'm going to bring something up. So 2 things. I'm going to see if I can find something on Facebook, but I'm going to find something first. Hold on. I'm going to give you a different one. So you can build a page. Here's an interview request. So you can go to social media and say, I'm looking for people who can help me validate a business idea. You send them to this form, and they then fill in the form. They fill in the form, they include their phone number. When they fill in the form, you've got about 5 minutes to phone them up. And you say, hey, Jordan, Craig here. Thank you very much for setting aside a few minutes to answer some questions about how you feel unsafe taking public transit at night. Is now a good time to have that conversation? Yes or no? So we can do the exact same thing over phone. I want to find you a group. So I'm going to go to Facebook for a second. There is something I want to say called Melbourne Startups. Hold on. Melbourne, Startup Grind Melbourne. Okay. So I see these ads on a regular basis in this startup group that ask almost the exact same thing. I'm working on this idea. I need some people to interview a form. Can you please fill in the form so I can do the interviews? So that's the way that I would answer that question. Yes, can't see the screen. Can someone share the webpage or link? I am presenting. So are you looking for the peer right here? I'll do this. Yes, I'll go like this. I'll send you this one as an example. Okay. Let me put this in here. As an example of someone says, hey, I want some help. Somewhere in here, and I find them. I joined this group, so I see them on a regular basis. So I'm just going to put this in here. If you can join the group, you can see some of the examples that they put out. Hey, so Julio says, what programs can I take to get a class with me? Here's the good news, Julio. You don't need a class. So I work with students outside of classes to help them become entrepreneurs. So Julio, you're on MS Teams. Just go find me on MS Teams. If you want, you can also text me. And this is open to anybody here. If you want some help, all you have to do is ask. Okay. We've still got another, by my clock, 9 minutes left. Anybody got some questions? Don't be shy.
Craig, thank you for presenting. I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
How do you get over this pit of despair when you go out and do all these things and then start doubting whether it's actually going to be a successful idea or not?
Good question. What's super interesting is that I'm right now in this 2-week program. I have 19 students from post-secondary schools across the entire province and a special online 2-week boot camp that's being held. And we decided we were going to try and find a way to help students specifically overcome loneliness as they're going through the challenge of being at school. How do we deal with mental health issues? It turns out when we interviewed almost 60 people from 15 countries around the world, because the people on our team are all over the place: Philippines, Singapore, India, Pakistan. Someone was down south, I forget where. I want to say it wasn't Colombia, but anyway. So we interviewed these 60 people. 100% said they got stressed at school. 85% of them said they alleviated that stress by spending time with like-minded people. So this is why I suggest everybody, if you haven't done it already, put your LinkedIn profile link in this page. The best way to alleviate some of that is, how do you find a way to talk to people that are in the exact same position? How do you find a way to help each other? This, for me, is the way that I would solve that problem. I shared with you a slide with 8 people from around the world. There's lots of value of having people from as far away as Spain. And here for me is one of the reasons. One of the reasons is the fact that I'm an early riser. Like, I usually get up at 5:30. If I have a problem I'm trying to solve, or if I'm a little overworked, I'll get up at 4. Like even last weekend when we were putting together this pitch for this idea for helping students, got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I had these people that are on the other side of the pond. So when it's 4 o'clock in the morning and nobody else is awake in North America, at least that I might talk to, I can talk to people overseas. Plus, people overseas have different sets of experiences, different ideas. And it's when you take an idea from one person and combine it with an idea from somebody else, all of a sudden you've got a really good idea. So I just pick up the phone and I talk to people. If I text somebody, usually the only thing I'm asking is, can I call? And they'll go, give me 15 minutes. So for me, the way I solve that problem is talk to people. I don't like to email. And I'll show you something. Hold on a second. I don't know how well you can see this, but in the bottom right-hand corner, if I take some of the, see if I can put it up there. Maybe it's, anybody see that number? Maybe I need to get closer. Don't know. But I have 194,000 unread emails in my inbox. Well, yeah, it's 6 digits. When people email me, the biggest thing that drives me crazy, they email me and they don't put the freaking phone number in their email signature. It should be in every email that you send, because I don't want to email you. I want to talk to you. When you talk to people, you learn all kinds of different things. You help each other way more. So if you email me, and I'm sure there are people that are on this call that have emailed me, and like 30 seconds later, I'm picking up the phone because I'd much rather talk. I think it's way more beneficial. So I see Mario. He says, hey, let's talk. I don't know if he's saying let's talk to me or let's talk to everybody, but that's the way that I would answer that question. Okay, 5 minutes left. Who else has got a question? So you can unmute yourself or ask it in the chat. Trevor, there you go, right? You email me, I'm like, I'm going to phone. I got 5 minutes to myself. The challenge is when people email me, I'm like, oh, I'll get to that. The problem is that before I get to it, I've got another 40 emails. And now all of a sudden it's somewhere in my inbox and I've totally lost sight of it. So if on occasion, if you email me and don't get a response in the time that you wanted, just resend the email and say bumping, right? When Moo, okay, using the example of a 40-year-old mom of one, Where do you find such specific customer segments to interview? Okay, so I'm going to take this question from, and I don't know how to pronounce your name. My apologies, Wunmi. Let's see if people in here can give some suggestions. If you're trying to find moms, first-time moms that are older, that have their first child, type in the chat, where can you find them? But you got some ideas? Toy stores, clothing stores for baby, daycare, parks, schools, playgrounds. So once you get a sense of who, then you can get a sense of where do they hang out. So this is within the customer segment. We got the demographic, okay? Moms with a child over 40. The geographics, where do they live? Where do they work? Where do they play? Or where do they learn? The thing that I didn't include in this is where do they shop? So totally right. Boys R Us, Instagram. Brad says Instagram. Entirely possible. And once you go like this, it's way easier to find that target customer. So yeah, prenatal classes before they get pregnant. Maybe you put a poster up for prenatal classes. The older you are, the more likely it is to happen. Older moms, the way I understand it, are much more likely to use a doula, someone who's more of a birth sister or birth assistant instead of going to a hospital or a doctor. So there's lots of different ways. Who else has a question? Wunmi, does that answer your question? And if you want, you can unmute yourself and help me understand why.
Sure, it does. Okay. It's just most of the suggestions I got here are mom targets, just moms. Like, how can I tell they're 40 or that's their first child?
So first of all, if they have more than one kid, odds are they've had those kids close together. They wouldn't be out with one kid, they'd be out with two. So I'm going to use heuristics, okay? I'm pretty sure, I'd like to think, and maybe I shouldn't admit that I can do this, but I'm pretty sure I can tell a mom who's 40 from a mom who's 26, okay? Now, a bunch of different things you can also use as heuristics. You can, if they're on their own, so my perception is that moms that are 26 tend to hang out in groups. Younger moms hang out in groups because they're all taking time off work at the same time. By the time you're 40, there aren't a whole lot of moms that are your age. So when moms that are 40 are out, odds are they're probably on their own rather than being with a friend. Now, just if you can help me understand, how do I say your name properly?
You got it, actually.
Wunmi, perfect.
Yeah.
Upcoming programs for Q students. Wow. I got a few things I'm going to share quickly. I'm just going to find them. So we run this whole program called 150 Startups. We actually run programs on Mondays, every other Monday. They're called MVP Mondays. And in between now and December, I've got 4 really cool MVP, minimal viable product experts from all over the world talking about how do you do a really good job of building what is called a minimal viable product. The other one we have is for those that are looking to learn how to sell, or maybe even be an intern, helping a tech firm learn to sell. I'm just going to go like this. I'm going to stick this in here. Okay, this is the other one. These are 2 others. Let me just go back to my right window. These are other programs that are coming up. I'm working on one for RBC. So we did one for e-commerce just last week. I'm working on one from RBC, which is on Side Hustle Secrets, which is going to be either the last Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or last Monday of November. We don't have exact dates yet. 30 seconds left. You're very welcome. Make sure that you fill in the form to go get a copy of Amos's book. Again, 150startups.com/Amos. I'm just going to put this in here, caps lock.
Okay, so it's 1 o'clock. So thank you, Craig. It's always a pleasure to hear you talk. And I've heard some of your examples already, but it's a great refresher to hear them again. We always welcome you and appreciate all the support that you provide to our Innovation Launchpad program at Concordia. Lastly, I would thank Startup Edmonton because I saw a lot of people from the community joined this conversation today. So thank you, Startup Edmonton, for spreading the word around. And have that's all from my side then. So we will be in touch at some other point, I guess, soon. And I will definitely share the links for the events in December that you've shared. And have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Good luck, everybody. Have a great weekend. Don't be shy if I can help, right? Craig Elias. If you type in Craig Elias, just ignore the murderer in Pittsburgh, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.